the Isaiah Berlin variety, but associational freedom. And only in communities of common interest can we build moral freedom. That's the starting point. And the big question is, what forms of association do we want and can we build that would accentuate freedom and move towards equality? Now, in that regard, I recommend a series of quite distinct changes. Bear in mind that I've got all my scars from working in the ILO over the years, and it is a remarkable fact that in the 199 conventions and 200-odd recommendations of the ILO that the governments of the world have passed in the last century or so, there's nothing on occupations and occupational freedom or regulation. And I think that the ILO must be converted into a work rights organization, and if they can't, because of its governance structure, which I've doubted in a recent article that's got me a lot more scars, then I think you've got to set up a new sort of organization for promoting work rights. You've got to move towards accreditation at global level, and you've got to move towards creating occupational associations to a greater extent. There are various ways where occupational associations could be promoted. You've got to avoid the problems of the guilds, but there are various prototypes developing. I work with the Self-Employed Women's Association of India. I will spend about half my year at the moment with them. And that sort of model is beginning to take place around the world. And I have a long section on what this requires. I also believe that you should move towards collaborative bargaining, what I call collaborative bargaining or associational bargaining. In other words, across occupations, between doctors and nurses, between teachers and auxiliaries, but across a very wide variety of occupations. And in that process, strengthen deliberative democracy within occupational communities. The suggestions I have on combating the panopticon society I'll leave out, but I do have some strong ideas. Now, the final parts I just want to emphasize, and I apologize for taking slightly too long, is that the social protection system has to be radically rethought. At the moment, it's still around the world essentially laborist in direction. It assumes people are performing labor and links benefits to labor, or it has gone to means testing and behavior testing for entitlement to benefits through sort of looking at the deserving and undeserving poor. I think if you're going to have a global open society, you're going to need ex-ante basic security. And that is why I believe strongly that you've got to move towards a basic income as a universal right within countries, and I've been arguing for it for a long time. I believe you must move towards full labour commodification, not partial. In other words, phase out enterprise benefits, because enterprise benefits and subsidies that all are provided at the moment are inegalitarian in their incidence. As far as redistribution, because any new embedded phase is going to have new systems of regulation, new systems of social protection, and new systems of redistribution, I think we have to be, again, far more innovative in our thinking. Recently there was a book by a group of American scholars, all respected people from around the table, you know, we'd all respect them, called Reimagining Socialism. And in this book they said, well look, all the means of production have gone to China, so we can't do anything about it. So it was a really pessimistic book. But the key assets of a modern global tertiary society are not the means of production, but the key assets are things like security, the security that we have, economic security, quality space, financial capital, information, voice, and most importantly, in my view, time. Time is an asset, and it's very unequally distributed. Having access to quality time is extremely unequally disaggregated. Now, as far as redistributive mechanisms are concerned, I think we, among those who are looking at labour and work issues, we should tackle subsidies to a much greater extent than we have done. Subsidies are given to all sorts of stupid job-preserving things like subsidies for cash for clunkers and various other forms of subsidies. Something like 5% of the GDP of all countries goes to subsidies for rich corporations and rich individuals. And the irony is that in developing countries it's more like 6%. Whereas if you use those 6% to pay for a basic income, you'd have some money left over. Now, the key little point where I've offended a few of my friends, on which I will end, is that I believe not only in a basic income, and we're seeing success at last around the world. We had a pilot scheme in Africa recently, which we ran for 2 years in some villages. And everybody, the IMF and others, said it's ridiculous to have a basic income scheme in impoverished Africa. So what we did was we put our hands in pockets and we gave small cards and $15 every individual in those villages per month. And we've seen a dramatic improvement in nutrition, health, child school attendance, no compunction at all, no compulsion to go to school. Women's status has improved, incomes have grown, work has improved, income distribution has improved. That's in a small part of southern Africa. We've seen, when I first went to Brazil proposing a basic income in the early 1990s, literally people laughed. Said, we can't have a basic income in Brazil. Eventually some brave people introduced it at local level. When Lula came in, he was skeptical, but he said, yes, we'll go for it. The Bolsa Familia. Today, 46 million people are receiving a monthly cash stipend. And there's a law saying there's a commitment for the whole country. And Lula, I had the great privilege of meeting him several times last year. He's going to come and open our Congress in end of June, and is committed to supporting it. I think a basic income is now on the agenda, but I have a little twist in the tail which might interest Carol in particular, perhaps some of the others, is that we're also suffering from a democracy crisis, besides an insecurity crisis. When I was a student, 1 in every 11 people were members of adults in Britain, were members of a political party. Today it's 1 in 90. We're going to have an election shortly next month. I dare say that under 60% of the electorate will vote. So that means the winning party will get less than a quarter of the electorate supporting. Now, other countries have been moving in the same sort of direction. The only condition which I think morally and ethically one could attach to the provision of a basic income is that a moral commitment to participate in elections, to vote in elections, and to attend at least one political meeting that would be organized per year. Would be a moral commitment, because I don't think you can force people, or should force. But it's very intriguing, as I was thinking of this, and it's not mentioned in the book, this last point, is that the country where I think the basic income is going to come first happens to be one of the very few countries in the world where voting is compulsory, and that is Brazil. Now, I think that you can argue in favor of a participatory basic income where you're indulging in schooling, in participation in the public life, rather than with Tony Atkinson, a friend Tony Atkinson has proposed, participating in community work or public works. Because public works distorts the labour market, whereas this actually has a virtue of encouraging people to participate in democracy. And so on that point, I would like to conclude and say very much that I hope that the occupational perspective, moving towards rights based around promoting of occupation, where work and leisure are promoted more than labour and play makes sense for a 21st century progressive agenda. Thanks very much for listening.